I know Representative Gary Click, one of really the best in the country, of course in the state of Ohio, but across the nation. And yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to have Representative Click and Klopfenstein for sponsor testimony.
But there's no more local control than Bob and Betty Buckeye.
Well, that explains why he keeps saying, well, that's not the way Representative Click does it.
I'm not supposed to get emotional, but I am.
Then we sat down with Click to discuss his bill and the controversy surrounding it.
And the chair would like to invite Representative Click to present testimony.
The question is, shall the bill pass? The chair recognizes Representative Click.
Welcome back to What's Clicking with State Representative Gary Click. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. Today we are diving back into the Q&A on University of Cincinnati. I believe we left off talking about HB 486, the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act. Representative, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I hate it. Can I blame you for cutting off right in the middle of a conversation?
Absolutely.
That's
I'll be the bad
all
guy.
Janae's fault. I had nothing to do with it. The time had nothing to do with it. The clock had nothing to do with it. It's all Janae's fault. So,
listeners,
anyway,
you can blame me.
Yes, yeah, that's what I pay you for, right?
Absolutely.
So in our reality, we were right in the middle of that conversation. So I think we'll just pick back up there. But obviously, we did vote that out of since our Q&A, we did vote that out. Went really well. And really, what we're talking about in the midst of this is the influence of Christianity in American history. And that is something that, if you watch my sponsor testimony, and maybe we'll have that in the show notes as well. No promises, but we'll see. You can look there for it. But the whole deal with that is that there's two reasons that it's not really being taught in school. Sometimes it is, but the reasons that it's not are deconstruction and then legal intimidation. And so deconstruction is that process whereby we stop teaching something. And if you go back in history, you'll find the farther you go back in history, the more they discussed the influence of Christianity. In fact, there's a book that I mentioned in my floor speech that says there is no principle of liberty that was in the Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution that was not first preached from the pulpits of America. And that book it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory Christian nationalist book, which I am none of those things. But it is actually published by Duke University and Oklahoma University, and it was in 1928. And so they were just closer to that time in history. They understood it better than we do today. And I just had to find it ironic that in the argument against this bill, one of the opponents, actually the minority leader, twice he mentioned about us being, if we're going to be a beacon on a hill, we cannot be doing these things. And little did he realize that phrase actually comes from Matthew chapter 5, and so he was actually showing and actually demonstrating how influential Christianity is on American history without even knowing it. And so we're going to pick up in that discussion. We weren't really arguing in class, but we'll pick up on that discussion in class and go through the end of that. But again, you can watch the full thing in the show notes as a link to the full Q&A.
All right, let's dive in.
It's all about, the influence of Christianity and on the Constitution and our framers. Is this really a bill that needs to be introduced and regarding this, even though teachers are teaching it, not in a matter of, there is a nuance between separation of church and state and not indoctrination, but just teaching history.
So, first of all, I would say I'm glad you had some good experiences. Not everyone has those. And I have talked to teachers and I know teachers who they live by this idea, they are risk averse. So I asked the ACLU 3 times, and first, let me clarify something in the bill. The bill has no mandates. It does not tell teachers what to do. It already affirms what the law is. The law, by the First Amendment, freedom of speech, teachers are already allowed to teach this. So I'm not giving them permission. They already have permission, but I'm adding an extra layer of protection because there are groups, and it's not necessarily the teachers. And if you are in the right school environment, in the right community, you can teach those things and not have a problem. But if you're in the wrong school environment, in the wrong community, and the wrong person hears about it, I mean, I had to go defend a church, or not a church, but a school board that was getting harassed by the Freedom from Religion Foundation for just opening in prayer. That's all they did. And they were being harassed. I had to write a letter as the chairman of the Ohio Christian Legislators Caucus and saying, listen, this is illegal, this is legal. And I had several other legislators sign this with me and say, you know, what they're doing is practicing everything that they're allowed to practice. So I asked the ACLU 3 times, he said, this is not necessary, it's already illegal. I said, then if it's already, when the Freedom from Religion Foundation files a lawsuit and says it's illegal, are you gonna defend the teacher, or are you gonna side with them? 3 times I asked him that, he would not answer the question, which means he's gonna be on the wrong side of it. Schools are typically risk averse. They will not want to do anything that's going to put them, because they don't want to spend, even if they're right, they don't want to spend the money on a lawsuit, which is understandable because they don't have a lot of money. And so they're risk averse when it comes to those things. And what's really interesting is in the opposition testimony, which we had last week, even the social studies teachers didn't know some of those things. There came an opponent, the leader, the president of the Ohio Social Studies Council. I asked her, I said, so if you're standing in front of the rotunda with that embarkation picture that I just described to you, I said, and you have students, what will you teach? And she said, we'll talk about the contrast of light and dark. It's like, this is not an art class, it's history class. And she wasn't going to teach. She, basically by her own admission, she would not teach the truth. And so a lot of teachers are afraid to, because they're afraid they're not going to have that support. And if you look at the emails that I get, and some of the, you can go, it's online, you can look at all the opposition testimony, and you can listen. I got plenty of voicemails where people are saying, this is unconstitutional, you can't be doing this. And people are saying, acting like it's a mandate, you're forcing your religion. We're not forcing anybody, we're just making sure people know what they have a right to do. And so that's why I do think it is necessary, because there are teachers who understand these truths, but they feel invisible shackles, is the word I've used, that handcuff them from actually teaching the truth. And pretty soon we're going to have some proponent testimony of teachers and other people who feel like this is a problem and they feel like this would actually help them. So I'd encourage you to make sure you catch that testimony when it's done, and you'll see that this is, for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, this is an issue. Thank you for the very good question, sir.
I don't know if I said my name before, but I'm Savannah.
Hi, Savannah.
And thank you for your response. I'm involved in my faith, and I've grew up with Catholics, in Catholic school, so I just appreciate your response. This might be a broad question, but how do you handle controversy, especially when the public opinion is so strong for some issues?
Okay, that's good. Well, first of all, I handle controversy by trying to be kind and loving to everyone. I will admit, once in a while I fail, because I think we all do, right? Sometimes I'll get frustrated and maybe I'll say something out of anger. I shouldn't do it, but I try to. I carried, the most controversial legislation I ever carried a couple of years ago was the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports. And when it came to me from families who had been victimized by that, and when people asked me, would you carry this legislation? The first thing I said to them is, if you expect me to yell at people and be mean to people, I'm not going to do it. And they said, no, that's exactly why we want you, because you have a good disposition. Many of the Democrats will actually come to me and say, even though we don't agree with you, we appreciate the kindness and the way you handle things. One of my biggest, I'm trying to think of the right word. The only word I can think of right now is opponent. And this person on the other side of the issue was a Democrat, Dr. Beth Liston. And in testimony, we're going back and forth on this. And I said to her publicly, where everybody could hear, I said, Representative Liston, I know that you care about children just as much as I do. So sometimes we want to be crass and we want to be callous. I don't think that gets the point across, honestly. That's what they call clickbait, no pun intended. But that's okay if you're like doing a shock jock kind of a thing. I said, I know you care about kids just as much as I do. I think where we disagree is on what that care and compassion looks like. And then I went on and made my points that way. I will also tell you that Representative Liston, her father was in hospice a little while after that, and I prayed with her and for her over her father. And after he passed, I prayed with her over that. I would consider her my friend. And this one of the things we all have to remember is that we can disagree without being disagreeable. And most of what you see on television, it doesn't make the headlines. I mean, if you can watch a video, I just put up yesterday with Representative Humphrey. We're walking off the floor. We did a little celebration video on our bill that passed. Remember, she's a Democrat. She has some very different views than I do on a lot of things, but we have some same views. And every time I see her, she runs up and gives me a hug. And at the end of this video, she leans in and gives me a hug. One time we were talking about DEI, SB1. Nobody's asked about that yet. We're talking about DEI. And I stood up and said, I talked about the whole concept of white privilege. And I said, if I have white privilege, I want my money back because I already told you how I grew up. And I said, we don't need DEI, we need GOD. And Representative Humphrey got up and she says, Representative Click, not everybody knows Jesus like you and I do. and she says, and this is why I think we do need it. And she gave her opinion. And when it's all done, so we both had different opinions on SB1 and on DEI, but you know, when it was all said and done, she's like, come here. And she just gives me and I give her a big old hug back. You can do that. You don't have to hate people who have a different idea or a different view than you do. And in fact, it's like you might have heard me say earlier, it's like I like the controversial questions or the hard questions better. I don't want people to pander to me. I will tell you what I think. That has never been my problem, is telling people what I think. But I always try to say it with kindness and with compassion. And we can agree to disagree. So thank you for asking that question. And I hope you all will model that yourselves. I try to keep my answers shorter because I know there's a few hands up. And I told David, I said, listen, being a pastor, I can be long-winded. Are we still taking an offering at the end of this? No, just kidding.
Hey, I'm Brendan. So during the 2023 election year, we had an amendment to put abortion rights on the state constitution. The Republican Party, made some claims that the amendment for some reason allowed trans kids to be transitioned or women were being forced to do abortions. I have the amendment right there on my laptop. Please explain where exactly on the amendment does it say that?
Okay, thank you. So I don't have it right in front of me, so I'm a slight disadvantage. But I can remember it enough, I think. And what I will tell you is the devil is always in the details. And what it says is an individual. So number one, in that, and I questioned one of the guys who was Marco from Michigan. You can look up Gary Click Marco from Michigan because it's online. There's no age limit on there. So that means anyone, any age, it could go to court and be contested, and somebody could argue that anyone, any age, has the right to an abortion because of what's not in there. This is an individual, no age limit. And this is reproductive rights, okay, if I remember correctly. So when we're looking, one of the biggest arguments against sex changes for children is that you're sterilizing children. You are taking away their reproductive rights, and it's this legal concept of informed consent. So how can you educate a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid that they can never have a child, that they can never be a mother, or that they can never be a father? How can you cannot provide informed consent? And so one of the arguments in that legislation has to do with preserving a child's reproductive rights But some people have suggested, including me, that that could be interpreted, and you never know how a court's going to interpret it, but that it could be interpreted to say that's not a valid argument, and that a child, and by the way, the number one provider of cross-sex hormones that will sterilize you is Planned Parenthood. And so the argument, they obviously believe it's a part of reproductive rights to change your your gender. And so there was that fear, and it was a legitimate fear. But again, we never know until the court weighs in on it. But that's a very legitimate question. You have a follow-up?
And I totally agree with the minors transgender because they don't know, their brain hasn't healed yet. So
Right.
that I'm not defending the transgender
Sure,
kids.
that's
all
a
that.
great question.
But on the amendment, it specifically lists which ones of conception, fertility treatment, continuance of one's pregnancy, miscarriage care, and abortion. So if it's really that if it's really specific, where are you getting transgender treatment exactly?
So again, what I will tell you is, because it's in general, it does say reproductive rights. This would fall in there. And quite honestly, I'm not an attorney. Are you studying law?
Yeah, but you did pass a law like...
Then you probably know more than I do about law. But I will tell you, our attorneys suggested that could be a possible interpretation. So, and it's fine, again, it's one of those things you might, so here would be my question to you, Matt, because obviously you have a strong opinion on that. Do you think I am actually expressing what I believe, or do you think I'm just manipulating the language to get the outcome that I want?
Pretty much manipulating, like
Okay.
the ballot board. 'Cause after looking at organization, trying to cross things out and then...
Yeah. Well, you are certainly entitled to that opinion. I will tell you that I never say anything that I don't believe. And that's how I believe that it could be interpreted. Nobody has, by the way, so maybe you're right, because I'm not always right. Nobody has made, since that has gone into law and gone into the Constitution, nobody has made that argument. So you could be right.
And you did pass a bill to ban it, and no one has filed a lawsuit to stop it.
Oh, yeah, they have, but
Well,
not
that
based,
was
on
before,
not based on those grounds.
But they didn't use this amendment.
You are correct.
So
you could be right.
all of that was just fear-mongering?
That's not what I said. I said what I believe. We said what we believe. We said what attorneys told us could be an argument. So that's not fear-mongering. If I'm telling you what the possibilities are, what I believe the true possibilities are, and what attorneys tell me the possibilities are, is that fear-mongering, or is that telling you what I believe?
Depends.
So
You could say hey,
yeah.
how can I tell the attorneys all right, hey, how can I mix this up to where I can confuse voters?
So and this is part of the process, is that people like me have an opinion that a firmly held belief and opinion, and people like you have a firmly held belief and opinion, and we compete for that idea. And ultimately, the people decide. Sadly, for my side, your side won. And congratulations. I mean, I don't know what else I can say after that, but it's a legitimate discussion, a legitimate dialogue.
Okay, and then I got one more, and then I'm done. Trust me.
Okay.
You also said that it will allow abortion during any time you want. But it clearly says, however, abortion may be prohibited after fetal viability. So where are you getting where a person can just wait for 9 months?
Read further. Unless a physician deems that it is, again, I'm going to paraphrase, that carrying that child provides a risk to the mother. And historically, physicians have interpreted that risk to be mental health, a financial risk. So basically, in the end, it's a physician, a doctor, that gets to decide if they are entitled or if they need an abortion after that age span. And that's just historical.
Okay, so but the 20-week ban is still in place, right?
Yes.
So abortion is still banned after 20 weeks, except
No,
for the
no,
life
no,
of mother.
no. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. No, abortion is legal.
Really? Because I thought the court just knocked out the 6-week ban, but kept the 20 weeks.
You might be more up to date on it than I am. Totally possible. My understanding is that abortion is legal in Ohio. Do you know anything different, Professor?
I believe the bottom line is closer to that. I mean, but again, obviously, doctors have the leeway, if this is a life-threatening pregnancy or whatnot. So, for those folks, it's not.
Thank you for the questions.
You're welcome.
All right, would you bring the microphone over to the other side of the room? We'll hear from the other neighbor here.
So my name is Elena, and I'm from Cleveland. And my question is, there's a lot of food deserts in Cleveland, not only Cleveland, but in Ohio. What are you all choosing to do about that, or how do you think we can solve that problem?
Well, we do fund, so first of all, we fund food banks. My church that I have has a food bank, and so we fund the food banks. And we do work, and I'll be honest with you, this is not the area of my expertise. And like I said, there's about 600 bills right now that are in the legislature, but we have plenty of programs that do assist people, again, with SNAP, things like that are out there. I know we had a little discussion about, what the Senate's doing on SNAP. Mm-hmm. And again, I grew up, I think you might have come in after I started, or maybe I just didn't see you. But I grew up on food stamps and welfare, so I totally get that. And we want our people to be taken care of, but I think the systems are in place that do take care of people.
Okay.
All right, my name's Nathan.
Hey, Nathan.
Thank you for taking the time to come here.
That's my son's name.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Yeah.
Good name. So I want to ask a question kind of going back to the Charlie Kirk Heritage Act, which,
yeah.
So my understanding of the legislation is that it's teaching like the history of Christianity in America, right, in like a more positive way, right?
So it is teaching it is saying that you can teach the impact of Christianity. You can teach the positive impact of Christianity in American history.
Right.
So it is about history. It's not about teaching Christianity. It's not about teaching theology. It's not about teaching doctrine or comparative religions. It's to be able to say, here, the Pilgrims came over, they were at church. It's able to say Pastor John Leland and Roger Williams and Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg are responsible for the First Amendment and for the separation of church and state, that you can say those things, you can expound on those things, but it's not about teaching the history of the church.
Sure. So my question would be, I guess I would ask, would our schools better off be teaching something like a history of, or like not a history of, but like what do religions believe? So what do Christians believe? Like as a Presbyterian, I say this, like I feel like if you're trying to improve people's opinions of Christianity or Christians, would we better not be served teaching about what the positive things Christians teach are?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and I commend you for your faith. I'm not trying to improve people's views of Christianity, at least not in the legislature. I'm trying to make sure that teachers have academic freedom to expound on some things. I have friends that are not, matter of fact, this Sunday I'm actually doing a wedding for an atheist. And I once in a while I'll tease her, I say, God can use an atheist too, and she'll get quiet. I say, you're ignoring me? She said, yes, but she still wants me to do her wedding. The reality is, so let's take an instance. Some people said, well, can you teach the negative sides of Christianity in American history? And I say, first of all, nobody's had a problem doing that. It gets done. So let's take an instance. Let's look at the Salem witch trials. How many of you have heard about that? Are Christians responsible for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody says yes.
Well, they were on LSD, right? So I don't think anybody. Well, that was part of it, right? It was the light or whatever that was in their rhyme. So no one was responsible for that.
So let me just give you just a touch of history on that. So number one, they were found guilty by a judicial action. So the church doesn't do judicial action. It was the state, it was the government that was sentencing them to death. Now they were manipulating religion to do that, but it wasn't the church. But there were pastors like Increase Mather, like John Wise, and another Christian leader, Thomas Brattle, who wasn't a pastor, who stood up and said, you can't do this because it does not meet the biblical principle of due process. And so it was actually the church that stood up against the Salem witch trials, but almost everywhere you go, Christians get blamed for it. And then a teacher might be afraid to give that counter argument because then I'm going to be accused of proselytizing or trying to convert people when they're just teaching the true history. Here's the other part of that true history. In America, it happened for 18 months, which is too long. There were 18 to 20 people executed, which is too many. But at the same time, it went on for years in Europe, and over 500,000 were killed in Europe over the witch trials. So I think it is very legitimate to say that we need to have a balanced interpretation of those things. There are people who will tell you that Christians taught that slavery, used the Bible to teach slavery. Were there some Christians who manipulated the scriptures to teach that? Absolutely there were. But also, it was the Christians that led the abolitionist movement. Frederick Douglass, Reverend Frederick Douglass, was a minister. Let's look at Booker T. Washington, the Tuskegee Institute. He said that it was the nickels and the dimes of the Sunday schools that financed the Tuskegee Institute. One of my favorite places to visit when I'm in Washington, D.C. is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. When I go across that whole memorial, you know what is missing there? It does not say one word about what he did aside from the civil rights movement. Does anyone know what his profession was? Yes, he's a reverend. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Do you know the civil rights movement started in the basement of a Baptist church? There's a book by Claiborne Carson, and it is the quote-unquote autobiography of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I put it around quotes because it's edited, because he never wrote an autobiography, but Claiborne Carson went and grabbed this speech, that speech, that speech, and that speech, and put them all together into an autobiography of MLK. And you can clearly see that faith was the driving force. And in fact, when he was in a Birmingham jail, he wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail. How many of you are familiar with that letter? And you know what he said? He was criticizing the white pastors, and rightfully so, because they said, we don't want to get involved in politics. And he said, you need to be getting involved, because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And it was his faith, but not one mention. That's part of what we call deconstructionism. Deconstruction is not when you start teaching something that's not true, it's when you stop teaching what is true. And we untether our future from our past. And people don't know or understand those things. And when we untether our future from our past, we're really bound to lose the things that made America the greatest nation in the entire world. So I believe those things ought to be taught. Abraham Lincoln, going back to slavery, his second inaugural address is beautiful. And you know what I can't quote it exactly, but he goes and he looks at the South and the North, both read from the same Bible. And they claim justification from the same God. He said, both cannot be true. He said, to some extent, neither are completely true, right? But he talked about both, in a sense, the both sides. And he said, how can we, claim, I'm trying to think of the words, claim justification from a just God and wring our bread from the sweat of another man's brow. This is the influence of Christianity in abolishing slavery. And how many of you know George Washington Williams? This is a name you ought to know. If you ever go to the State House, go to the George Washington Williams room. George Washington Williams was the first black legislator in Ohio. And you know what his profession was? He's a pastor. There's a picture of him holding up a Bible in a portrait there. He also wrote a book that you can find on Kindle, and I'd advise you to get it. It's cheap. And it is called The History of the Negro from 1619 until 1871. It stopped in 1871 because that was contemporary. And he uses the Bible to justify equality. And I think that is worth being taught, that this impact of faith in America made a difference to create equality for all. And that doesn't mean you have to be a Christian. You know, Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian, but he respected Christianity. And the pastor, John Leland, actually supported him. And Benjamin Franklin was not a Christian, but at the Constitutional Convention, he actually stood up and called for prayer. And he quoted 14 different verses from the Bible extemporaneously, because even though they were not Christians, they recognized the value of Christianity on society. And so we can see those things and we can act upon those things without indoctrinating, but we should tell, no part of American history should be censored. It should all be free. We should be able to teach it.
Guys, one last question.
My name is Raleigh, by the way, and thank you again for coming, Mr. Click. One question I have is like when I often ask myself as a Christian myself when it comes to politics, there's oftentimes a conflict. How does like someone like you who was a pastor and, you know, now a legislator, you know, dealing with your own faith and through as a role as a legislator, how do you find that balance between faith and as a legislator?
That's a great question. So I never go into my legislation, because there is a separation of church and state. By the way, separation of church and state is a biblical principle. The Bible teaches it. But it's not alienation of church and state. It's like, okay, this is your role, and this is your role. It doesn't say that, and by the way, it's not a separation of God and state. We can acknowledge God. Our money acknowledges God. Our national motto acknowledges God. Our state motto acknowledges God. That is not unconstitutional to acknowledge God. But what is unconstitutional is to say, okay, we're a Baptist nation, we're a Catholic nation, we're a Protestant nation, or a Presbyterian, or anything, or any of that. Or even to say, I don't even describe ourselves as being a Christian nation. People ask me, I was asked that by public radio a couple of years ago. I said, well, that depends on how you define it. If you're saying, were we influenced by Christianity? Yes. Do we say everyone has to be a Christian? Absolutely not. And so what I do is, Reuters magazine asked me, or Reuters news service asked me a couple of years ago, do you have a verse that you use for this? I said, yes, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I try to apply that principle, but I never get up and say, we have to pass this law because the Bible says this. That is not the reason to pass a law. But if I look and see that law is consistent with something that's in the Bible, but it's still a good law. For instance, how many of you like the laws against murder? I think they're good. Well, that's thou shalt not kill. Should we take that off the books because it's in the Bible? What about perjury? Should that be illegal? You know, that's also a commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness. What about theft? Thou shalt not steal. Can we take that off the books because that's imposing our religion on someone? No. There's an alignment between the moral code or the legal code of the Bible, which is different from the worship of the Bible. And so it's not up to us to tell people who to worship or how to worship. But if we find some values in the Bible that are applicable generally to everyone, like don't kill, I think that's a good thing. And there's actually 4 pastors in the legislature right now. Someone said there's going to be more pastors than there are attorneys, and that's not a bad thing, according to them. We have 3 in the House. Myself, Diane Mullins, and Jonathan Newman. In the Senate, we have Herschel Craig. He's a black Democrat senator who's a pastor also. And every time we see, and he's one of the greatest guys. Every time he sees me, he says, Pastor, I love you. And he comes up, he gives me a big hug and everything. And we just have a great relationship. We're on different sides of the aisle. We're in different chambers, but he's also a pastor. And so there's no prohibition on anything. You can be anything and be in the legislature. And again, I would encourage, regardless of what your political beliefs are, I would encourage everyone to investigate opportunities, work on a campaign, go talk to somebody, show up at the Democrat meetings, show up at the Republican meetings, introduce yourself. That's where you start meeting people who are involved and who are engaged. And if you have problems reaching out to your legislator and they're not getting back to you, reach out to me in my office and I'll help you make that connection. And If any of you want to come see me at the State House, I don't represent, is there anyone here from Seneca or Sandusky County? Okay, I don't represent any of you, but still, if you want to come to my office and say hello, I would certainly welcome you. Professor, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, Representative.
Well, listeners, that is the end of the Q&A on the University of Cincinnati with Representative Click. It was incredible to hear the students' ideas and opinions, but also hear the conservative values that Rep. Click stands for. On the conservative values, we actually just passed HB 450, if I remember correctly.
485.
That is 485. My apologies.
Which comes right before 486.
There's a lot of 480s right now in the bill numbers.
486 is the Charlie Kirk bill, and 485
Yes.
is the Baby Olivia bill.
Two powerhouse bills.
Yeah.
The Baby Olivia bill is, I hope, going to make such a positive change within our state. But Representative, I believe we have a 3-minute video clip of the Baby Olivia Act.
So, and so just as a little teaser, so we're going to have Representative Melanie Miller on, who carried that bill, as well as a physician who calls himself the pro-life doc, and he came and gave testimony. And I'm going to have both of them on the podcast next week, just really to talk about this. What does it mean to watch the Baby Olivia video? And is it accurate? You know, the opposition always wants to try to say it's not accurate. What's really their goal is they don't want children to receive accurate information. They don't want kids to see this, because if kids see this, if they see this, they might realize it's a baby. And if they realize it's actually a baby, they might want to keep it. That's what they're afraid of. They do not want to follow the science. But we're going to give you a little teaser by just showing you the video now, and then we'll be back next week to have a discussion with State Representative Melanie Miller and the pro-life doc.
This is Olivia. Though she has yet to greet the outside world, she has already completed an amazing journey. This is the moment that life begins. A new human being has come into existence. At fertilization, her gender, ethnicity, hair color, eye color, and countless traits are already determined. She begins to implant in the uterus about 1 week after fertilization. Her cells organize into what we call an embryo. At 3 weeks and 1 day, just 22 days after fertilization, Olivia's heartbeat can be detected. The buds of her arms and legs appear by 4 weeks. She begins to move between 5 and 6 weeks with both spontaneous and reflexive movements. At 6 weeks from fertilization, her brain activity can be recorded and bone formation begins. She can bring her hands together at 7.5 weeks, and separate fingers and toes emerge. She can also begin to hiccup. At the beginning of the 9th week, Olivia will have grown from a single cell into nearly 1 billion cells, and she is now called a fetus. She will suck her thumb and swallow, grasp an object, touch her face, sigh, and stretch. At 11 weeks, she is playing in the womb, moving her body and exploring her environment. Her taste bud cells have matured by week 12, but are still scattered throughout her mouth. Her mother will first sense Olivia's movements between 14 and 18 weeks, an event called quickening. Beginning at 18 weeks, ultrasounds show speaking movements in her voice box. Around 20 weeks, with a lot of help, babies have survived outside the womb. At 27 weeks, her eyes are responding to light. She can recognize her parents' voices and will even recognize lullabies and stories. Olivia has gone on an amazing journey during these last 9 months. She will soon signal to her mother that it is time for delivery and greet the outside world.
You've been listening to What's Clickin', the official podcast of State Representative Gary Click, covering Ohio's 88th House District. That includes Seneca and Sandusky counties in Northwest Ohio. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. If you would like to reach out to us, you can send us an email at rep88, that's REP88, at ohiohouse.gov, or you can give us a call at 614-466-1374. Thanks again for joining us for What's Clickin' with State Representative Gary Click. We'll be back again soon to let you know what's clickin' in Ohio.